Another form of compute scenario is that of serverless. Serverless refers to scenarios where application code is executed on demand without worrying about the underlying infrastructure because that's provided by the cloud provider. So basically, from the user perspective, there is no need to keep the environment up and running constantly. Once a service or function is needed, the application is simply executed. The cloud provider then worries about making the resources available during the runtime and then releasing the resources back to the environment at the end of the execution of the application. Let's look at this figure to understand serverless better. Consider that an application needs infrastructure resources specific for that application when it's executing. In a serverless scenario, those infrastructure resources are automatically provisioned by the cloud provider. So the user or organization is charged only when the application runs, and the cloud provider provisions resources for that application. So all aspects of the infrastructure, whether that be of the server, storage, or other resources specific for the application, they're all abstracted from the user and are provisioned and managed by the cloud provider. The user simply has to focus on the development and execution of the application. So here's a summary of the key characteristics of the serverless environment. So again, serverless doesn't mean that there are no servers, but rather it means that the client does not have to worry about provisioning and managing servers, as that task is outsourced to the cloud provider. Rather, the cloud provider chooses the servers, which are managed by the cloud provider itself. Also, server management is completely with the cloud provider. This means all server management functions that include patching, security, logging, scaling, load balancing, etc. They're all handled by the cloud provider. The user, again, simply has to focus on running the application code. Also, a user or client organization therefore gets the infrastructure on demand. Normally, when a user or organization subscribes to infrastructure services, they get their desired instance, storage, and networking for the whole server instance. The cloud provider is responsible to maintain that server. The organization is charged when that instance is in use. In a serverless case, the organization is not charged for the whole server or instance or any of the resources that are attached to that instance, unless the application is executed. So instead, the specific resources that are needed to run that application, even if it's a small function, they are allocated by the cloud provider, and the client organization is charged only for those resources for that duration when the application is executing. The nature of this model obviously results in much lower costs. Usually the cloud providers only charge the client organization for execution time, not the servers or the capacity of the servers that have been provisioned. As the cloud provider is responsible for managing the servers, they provide guarantees for high availability for applications. That's another characteristic of the serverless environment. Also, for applications where traffic isn't predictable, this model can be quite useful, as the user organization does not have to plan for the infrastructure resources. They get the resources that they need whenever they want, and again, they're charged only for what they use. So the real advantage is that organizations and users focus on building applications without thinking about servers or provisioning of those servers. For example, now one can run a data warehousing service as serverless, where the organization can focus on the data warehousing functionality and not on provisioning of the underlying infrastructure requirement. Now let's look at some examples for serverless compute services that are available through various cloud providers. Using AWS Lambda functions, for example, one can run code with the zero administration on the user part. Amazon Fargate is a serverless container service. So one only pays for this service based on the time used to run containers and the size of the containers. Amazon DynamoDB is a serverless database service. And also Amazon S3, which is a popular storage environment, is a serverless object storage service. Once you define a bucket, you can start using the service and pay only for what you use. And so on. There are other examples of serverless services as well when you're looking to get services from the cloud providers.